Kansas, 1882. In Harrow Bend, the cattle buyers were the men worth knowing. This was not a matter of opinion. It was simply the order of things, as fixed and unquestioned as the way the Arkansas River bent south at the edge of town. The cattle buyers arrived in October with good coats and easy money, and the confident handshakes of men who had come from somewhere interesting, and the town received them accordingly. They ate at the corner table of the Harrow House Hotel. Their stories were long and entertaining. They made everything look like the beginning of something worth watching. Cyrus Vann ground the wheat. He was 47 years old, and he had been running the Harrow Bend grain mill since he was 32, when the previous owner's hands gave out and Cyrus bought the equipment at a fair price and the building at a price he never discussed with anyone. He had no illusions about the work. The mill was loud and dusty, and hot in summer and cold in winter, and the millstones needed dressing every few weeks, and the grain dust collected in the air on long-running days in a way that he took seriously enough to forbid open flame inside the building. He was at the mill before the sun was fully up. He was there when the last farmer collected his grain in the evening. In between, he ground everything Harrow Bend brought him at rates the town considered fair, and he considered barely adequate. And he fixed the things that broke without announcement. And he kept the wheel turning. He was 47 years old. His hair had gone gray at the temples. He had calluses on his hands from 15 years at the millstone, and the grain dust had worked itself so permanently into the creases of his face that washing only moved it around. He had been a widower for 6 years. The town knew him the way you know a reliable piece of equipment. Present, functional, not something you thought about very much. What the town did not know was that he had been carving a small wooden wren since September. A boy named Nate Hollister, 8 years old, had asked him in August whether birds made of wood could sing. Cyrus had said no. Nate had thought about this and asked whether a wooden bird could still be real in the ways that counted. Cyrus had considered the question honestly, the way he considered everything, and said he supposed it could. He had been working on the wren since then, in the early dark before the mill opened, with a good knife and a piece of cedar he had been saving for no particular reason for 2 years. Leora Dupree arrived in Harrow Bend on a Wednesday in late August. She was 24 years old, and she had come from Cincinnati to take the school teacher position that had been vacant since spring. She stepped off the stage and looked at Harrow Bend the way a person looks at something they have committed to before fully seeing, searching for the parts worth staying for. She found the library shelf in the schoolhouse stocked with more care than she had expected. She found the mountains visible on clear days to the west. And she found the grain mill at the edge of town with its wheel turning in the creek, the sound of it steady and rhythmic, present beneath everything else. She noticed the mill the first week. She did not notice Cyrus Vann for 2 more. She came to the mill on a Tuesday in September with a broken gear mechanism from the school's printing press, a small iron and wood assembly she had no idea how to repair. She had been told the miller did mechanical work on the side when time allowed. He was at the millstones when she arrived, adjusting the gap with the focused economy of a man who has performed a task 10,000 times and still does it. He heard her at the door and finished what he was doing before he looked up. "Miss Dupree," he said. She was mildly surprised he knew her name. In Harrow Bend, everyone knew everyone within the first week. She held out the gear mechanism. He took it, turned it in his large hands, reading it the way a man reads something he has seen versions of before. "The axle's stripped," she said. "The axle's stripped," he agreed. "But that happened because the housing cracked first. Fix the axle without fixing the housing, and it'll strip again in a month." Nobody had mentioned the housing. She hadn't seen a crack. "How long?" she said. "Come back Thursday," he said. She came back Thursday. The mechanism was repaired, axle, housing, and a bent alignment pin she hadn't noticed, straightened without mention. She looked at it for a moment. "You fixed the pin," she said. "It was there," he said. "It would have caused you trouble eventually." She paid him less than the work was worth, and she suspected this, and he said nothing about it, and she thanked him and left. She was back the following Tuesday with a question about grain processing for a lesson she was planning for the older students. The Tuesday after that, with a broken window latch from the schoolroom. The Tuesday after that with nothing at all, which she addressed by saying she had more questions about the mill's operation and would it be all right to watch him work for a little while. Cyrus Vann, who had never been watched and was not entirely certain what to do about it, said yes. What she did not tell him, and what he would not have entirely believed, was that she had finished preparing the grain lesson in September. She was now 3 weeks into coming to the mill for reasons she had not yet put into words, even for herself. Preston Aldridge arrived in October. He was 33 years old, a cattle buyer out of Wichita who came through Harrow Bend every fall, and was considered, by the general agreement of the town, the finest-looking man who passed through the county on a regular basis. He was broad-shouldered and easy-lawing, and he dressed well in a way that was deliberate without being obvious, and his stories were long and entertaining and more or less true. He had decided, with the calm certainty of a man accustomed to outcomes going his way, that Leora Dupree was exactly the kind of woman he had been looking for. He appeared at the schoolhouse on a Friday afternoon with arranged flowers, proper ones, ordered from the next town, and introduced himself with the confidence of a man who expects introductions to go well. They went well. Leora received him warmly and received the flowers with the particular grace of a woman who knows what arranged flowers mean and is measuring quietly how to feel about it. He was not a bad man. This was the complication. He was genuinely good-natured, well-intentioned, and completely wrong, in the way that a very good answer to the wrong question is still wrong. Berta Scholl, the postmistress, had an opinion. "Preston Aldridge," she said, when Leora came in for her mail that week. "Good family, excellent prospects. He's been asking about you since Monday." She handed over the letters with the brisk efficiency of a woman delivering a verdict. "He's going to invite you to the harvest social. You know that." "Is he?" Leora said. "He will," Berta said, with the confidence of a woman who considers these things already settled. "Who turns that down?" Leora looked out the post office window toward the far end of the street, where the mill wheel was turning in the gray October light. "He's very charming," she said. Berta looked at her the way she looked at ledger entries that didn't add up. "But," she said. "No but," Leora said pleasantly. She picked up her letters. On her way out, she paused on the step and listened for a moment to the steady sound of the millstone turning, the same sound she heard every morning walking to school and every evening walking home. She had started timing her route to pass within earshot of it. She had not examined why. She was beginning to examine it now. What Leora had not expected, when she started coming to the mill in September, was to understand what the work actually cost. Not money. She understood that quickly enough because Cyrus charged the widow families half what he should have, and sometimes less. Adelaide Whittaker, who had lost her husband in March and been left with 60 acres of winter wheat and no one to help her manage it, paid nothing at all, which Cyrus recorded in the ledger as an equipment maintenance fee, and which was, as best Leora could tell, a fiction he had constructed with some care. What she had not expected was the physical cost. She had seen the calloused hands and the dust in the lines of his face on the first visit. What she began to notice as October came on was the way tiredness settled into him by late afternoon. Not complaint, not slowness, just the quality of a man moving through the last hours of the day on will rather than energy. The grain dust that had worked into the creases of his face at 47 would work deeper in the years ahead, and she knew enough about mills by now to understand what that meant for a man's lungs over decades, and she had heard him cough on a cold morning and say nothing about it. He was at the mill before sunrise. He left after dark. In between, he ground everything the town brought him, kept Adelaide Whitaker's grain bill in a column labeled maintenance, and carved a wooden wren before the sun was up for a boy who had asked a serious question in August. She had found out about the wren by accident. He had been working on it when she arrived one Tuesday morning, and had covered it quickly when he heard her footstep on the threshold. But not quickly enough. She had seen it. A small cedar bird, every feather worked with the careful attention of someone who had been watching the real thing for a long time. "For Nate Hollister," she said. He looked up briefly. "He asked me whether a wooden bird could be real," he said. In the ways that counted, he went back to the cedar without further comment. She sat in the chair he had put out for her visits and watched him work, and thought about what kind of man carves a bird before sunrise for an 8-year-old boy, and then covers it quickly when someone comes in, so they won't make anything of it. She thought about the mill as it actually was, not the pleasant idea of it, the turning wheel and the smell of fresh grain, but the real thing, dust, the weight of the work. The ledger that ran thin 6 months out of 12 and would run thinner if he ever charged what the work was worth. The 47-year-old body already carrying 15 years of this and prepared, as far as she could tell, to carry 15 more without complaint. And she thought, he does all of this for this town, and half of them couldn't tell you his first name. That was the moment she stopped pretending her Tuesday visits were about anything other than what they were. Preston Aldridge asked Leora to the harvest social in the first week of November. He came to the schoolhouse after the children had gone with the arranged flowers he had made a habit of and asked with the easy confidence of a man who expects yes. She said she would think about it. After he left, she walked directly to the mill, not on her usual path and not with any pretext, just directly there, with the particular energy of a person who has been holding something in long enough that they need to move toward something. Cyrus was finishing the last run of the day. He looked up when she came through the door. "No broken things today," he said. "No," she said. She sat in her chair and was quiet for a moment. "Preston Aldridge asked me to the harvest social," she said. Cyrus set down the adjustment wrench he had been holding. He looked at her, not with the careful, neutral expression he usually kept, but with something more direct and considerably less controlled. "He's a good man," he said. "He is," she said. "You should go," he said. He picked up the wrench again. His voice was even. His hands were not entirely steady. She watched him pick up the wrench and go back to the millstone with the focused precision of a man applying himself deliberately to a task in order to stay there. She watched his hands, the calluses, the gray dust that never fully washed out, the slight tension in the knuckles that his boss was working carefully not to show. "Cyrus," she said. He didn't look up. "I haven't decided yet," she said. He worked the iron adjustment. "You should go," he said again, with the quiet conviction of a man who has already done the arithmetic, who has looked at 47 and 24 at a 2-room house next to a grain mill and a cattle buyer's prospects, and has closed the question before it could fully open. She looked at him for a long moment, then she left. She had not decided anything, but she had learned something. "I want to stop here and speak to you directly for just a moment. You know what gets me about Cyrus right there? He tells her to go. He says it twice with that careful voice and those unsteady hands, because he has already decided, at 47, that he is not what she deserves. He has done the math and drawn the line through himself before she had any say in it. That isn't humility. That is a wound that has learned to speak in a practical voice. and Leora sees it. She sees it before he does. This story has found its way to listeners in Alabama and in Oregon and in countries I can't begin to count. From the Deep South to the Pacific Northwest, from Canada to South Africa to the Philippines, and everywhere in between. Wherever you are tonight, I'm glad you found Prairie Hearts. What state or country are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. Every state, every country, every corner of this wide world. And if this story is sitting with you, go ahead and leave a like. It tells me you're out there and that we should keep going. Now, Preston Aldridge is about to take Leora Dupree to the Harvest Social, and Cyrus Vann is about to make the kind of decision that quiet, good men make when they have decided, wrongly, that they have no right to want anything for themselves. Leora went to the Harvest Social with Preston Aldridge. She had decided, after a week of turning it over, that she owed herself certainty that the way Cyrus had said you should go with a steady voice and unsteady hands could mean one thing or mean nothing, and she was not going to misread the situation in either direction. Preston was everything Harrow Bend said he was: attentive, excellent company, a good dancer, genuinely funny when he wanted to be. He introduced her to people she hadn't met. He was, by every visible measure, the sensible choice. She danced 2 dances with him. On the 3rd, she looked across the church hall and stopped. Cyrus Vann was there. He had come. She had not expected him to come. She had been told by 2 separate people that the miller kept to himself, that he worked too hard to have much use for celebrating, that she'd never see him at a social gathering. But he was there at the edge of the lamplight in a clean shirt with the mill dust washed from his face, and he was watching her dance with Preston Aldridge with the expression of a man watching something he has decided. He has no right to want. She saw his face. She understood. The dance ended. Preston said something charming. She smiled and thanked him and said she needed a moment of air. She walked to the door. She walked past the door. She walked all the way to the far edge of the gathering where Cyrus was standing alone, and she stopped in front of him. "You came," she said. "I came," he said. His voice was doing the careful, even thing again. He was holding his hat in both hands, and the brim was bending. "Dance with me," she said. He looked at her, then at Preston Aldridge across the room. "Miss Dupree." "Leora," she said. "My name is Leora, and I have been coming to your mill since September, and I am asking you to dance with me." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he set down his hat. He was not a skilled dancer. "I am going to step on your feet," he said quietly, stating this as a practical fact rather than a joke. "I'll manage," she said. He counted under his breath as they moved. She did not say a word about it. 3 days after the Harvest Social, Cyrus was at the millstone before sunrise, working and trying not to think about Leora Dupree, looking at him across a crowded hall and asking him to dance. He failed at the second part. She came that Thursday with a cracked mortar from the school kitchen. He fixed it in 20 minutes. They talked the way they had been talking since September, easy, honest, specific. The kind of conversation he had not had with anyone in a long time. Then there was the quiet that sits between 2 people who have found a comfortable silence together. "Preston is going to ask you again," Cyrus said, not easily, with something working underneath the words. "I know," she said. "He's a good man, Leora." "You keep saying that," she said, "because it keeps being true." He looked at the millstone for a moment, then reached for a lightness he didn't quite feel, a tone meant to close the subject gently. "One day a man like Preston Aldridge is going to offer you everything this town can't, everything you deserve." He said it quietly, almost to himself, a fact, a small offering-shaped kindness. Leora was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at him with those gray-blue eyes that had been paying attention since August and said, simply, "I'd rather it be the miller." Cyrus looked at her. Then he laughed. The genuine laugh of a man who has heard something unexpectedly charming and has received it as exactly that. Charming, unexpected, meant in general and not directed at him specifically. "Well," he said, "there aren't many of us left who aren't held together with borrowed rope." He turned back to the millstone. Leora looked at the mill wheel turning for a long moment, at the water moving through it, at the 47-year-old man who kept it running day after day for a town that called it a maintenance fee. Then she set down her coffee cup. "Cyrus," she said. He didn't look up. "I am talking about you," she said. The millstone turned. He looked up. He stared at her. "Think about it," she said. She had learned this from him. The "I know" that closes a thing cleanly rather than leaving it open to be argued with. She stood up, picked up the mortar, and walked out of the mill into the November morning. She was done being subtle. He thought about it. He thought about it for 5 days, which was 5 days of arriving at the same conclusion from the same direction. He was 47 years old. His hair had gone gray. There were 23 years between them and a 2-room house attached to a grain mill, and a ledger that ran thin 6 months out of 12, and grain dust that did not wash out of the lungs any more than it washed out of the creases of a face. A 24-year-old woman from Cincinnati who had been to normal school and could manage a classroom of 23 children deserved a man who could offer her more than that arithmetic. On the 6th day, Preston Aldridge came to the mill. Not to cause trouble. Preston was not a man who caused trouble. He came to collect a grinding order, and he was pleasant about it, and he said, entirely without guile, "I'm going to ask Miss Dupree properly before the month is out. I thought you should know, since you two seem to be friendly." Cyrus took the payment. "She's a good woman," he said. "She is," Preston said. "I think she could be happy here with the right man." After Preston left, Cyrus stood at the millstone for a long time without working. He thought about the gray at his temples, and the 47 years, and the dust and the thin months. He thought about what it meant to ask a 24-year-old woman to look at all of that and call it a life. He had been a fool to let himself think about it, and now it was time to stop. He went back to work. Leora came the following Tuesday. He was at the millstone, and when she came through the door, he did not pull out the chair he had been setting out every Monday evening for the past 2 months. He said he had a great deal of work to finish, and perhaps it would be better if— He did not finish the sentence. Her expression stopped him. She stood in the mill doorway with the November light behind her and looked at him with those gray-blue eyes that had been watching since August and said, "Don't." "Leora." "Don't," she said again, not angry, certain. "Whatever you've decided, whatever math you've done about your age and your mill and what you think I deserve, don't." He looked at his hands. She looked at his hands too. "I know what you're telling yourself," she said. "You're wrong." She left before he could answer. He stood at the millstone for a long time after. He was not sure he was wrong. He was not certain of anything except that the mill felt considerably emptier than it had since September, and he had done that himself, and he could not say with confidence that he had done the right thing. It was the 2nd week of December when the fire started. The mill's lower grain room had been running all afternoon. The Hendersons had brought in their late harvest, and the millstone had been turning without pause since morning. The grain dust had been building in the air the way it does on a long-running day when the vents are not fully open. And somewhere in the drive equipment a spark found it. It was not a large fire in the beginning. It was a fast one, moving through dry grain and dry timber in the lower storage room, where half the town's winter grain supply was waiting to be collected. Preston Aldridge was first on the scene. He came at a run with 2 men from the hotel, calm and clear, and organized a bucket line from the creek. This was a good instinct. It was the right instinct for the situation he could see. The bucket line could not reach the lower storage room without going through the fire itself. Cyrus heard the shout from his house. He came with what he understood, the heavy canvas fire blankets he kept for exactly this situation, the iron rod that controlled the grain chute, and 15 years of knowing every interior wall and passage in that building. He did not go in through the front. He went around to the equipment access at the back of the mill, the passage Preston didn't know existed, and moved through the smoke in the interior darkness by memory alone, knowing where every beam was, where every step was, where the grain chute control was mounted on the wall beside the second millstone. He shut off the grain flow first. That was the actual problem. The fire was feeding on the grain, still dropping from the chute above. Stop the flow, starve the fire. He found the iron control rod in the smoke and pulled it closed, and the flow stopped, and the fire changed its character, still serious, but no longer growing. Then he moved the stored grain, sack by sack, through the equipment passage, dragged and carried and stacked in the yard outside. He could not save all of it. He saved most of it. On his last pass through, the canvas blanket caught fire at his forearms, not severely, but enough. He came out the equipment passage and sat down on the frozen ground and looked at his arms, and the town was around him. The bucket line still running at the front, the fire coming under control now that it wasn't being fed. And Leora Dupree came through the crowd and crouched in front of him and took his arms in her hands without asking. She looked at the burns. She looked at him. "I know what you're about to say," he said. It came out differently than he had intended. Not a deflection this time, a surrender. She held his arms carefully, her cold hands steady on the burned places. "I've been thinking about everything," he said, "for 3 weeks. Everything you said, everything I said back." He looked at the mill, the structure still standing, the fire nearly out. "I was wrong," he said, "about the math, about what I can offer." She waited. "I kept thinking about the years and the dust and the thin ledger," he said. "I kept telling myself you deserved a better calculation." He looked at his arms in her hands. "And I was making the decision for you, which is," he stopped, started again. "You run a classroom of 23 children every day. You don't need me making decisions for you." She was quiet for a long moment. Behind them, Harrow Bend was moving, voices assessing the damage, men counting the saved grain sacks in the yard. "You went into a burning building," she said, "to save grain." "It needed saving," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what I've been trying to tell you since September." Preston Aldridge came to the mill the following morning. He stood in the doorway and watched Cyrus working with bandaged arms. Not resting, working, because the millstones needed to be inspected and the grain room needed to be assessed, and there was always something that needed doing, and said, "I'm not going to ask her." "You don't have to do that," Cyrus said. "I know I don't." Preston came into the mill and looked around at the scorched but standing walls, at the grain stacked in the yard. He picked up a cedar shaving from the workbench, from the wren Cyrus had been carving, and turned it in his fingers. "I've been telling myself she needed time, that she'd come around." He set the shaving down. "She didn't need time, she just wasn't looking at me." Cyrus said nothing. "You know what the difference is," Preston said. Not bitterly, genuinely. "You went in from the back because you knew where the problem actually was." "I was working the front door." He almost smiled. "She understood that about you a long time before I did." He extended his hand. Cyrus shook it. "One thing," Preston said at the door. "She's been patient since August. Don't make her wait any longer." He put on his hat and walked out into the December morning. Cyrus looked at his bandaged arms. He thought about Leora holding them on the frozen ground in front of the whole town. He thought about 4 months of Tuesday mornings and the chair he had put out every Monday evening, and then finally, wrongly, not put out. He thought about a woman who had said, "I'd rather it be the miller," and had meant it, and had been waiting for him to understand that he was the miller she meant. He was 47 years old. His hair was gray. His arms were bandaged, and he had the clearest idea he had had in a very long time of exactly what he needed to do. He went to the schoolhouse that afternoon. He had never been to the school's house, had no reason to before now. He stood at the door after the children had gone and knocked, which felt strange and formal after months of her simply walking through his mill door without announcement. Leora opened it. She looked at his bandaged arms, then at his face. "Come in," she said. He came in. He stood in the middle of the schoolroom, with its rows of small desks and its chalkboard, where she had written December 14 in her clear handwriting, and held his hat in his bandaged hands, and said, "I've been thinking about what I can offer you." "Cyrus." "Let me finish," he said, not unkindly, with the steadiness of a man who has prepared something and intends to say it. "I've been telling myself it wasn't enough. The mill, the gray hair, the 23 years between us, the dust that doesn't wash out, and the ledger, and all of it." He looked at the hat in his hands. "I was deciding things for you, which is not." He stopped, started again. "You make decisions for 23 students every day. You don't need me making them for you." He looked up at her. "I kept Adelaide Whitaker's grain account in the ledger as a maintenance fee for 3 years, he said. "I've fixed things without charge for the people who couldn't afford it. I don't do those things so anyone knows about them. I do them because they need doing." His voice was steady. "But I need you to know that I know those things aren't nothing, that I'm not nothing." "I know," she said. And this time it was her using the word he had taught her by example. "The I know that means I have always known. That means you are the last person in this room to arrive at this." He crossed the schoolroom and kissed her, not tentatively. He had been careful since August, careful about everything, and he was done being careful. She kissed him back with the complete conviction of a woman who has been right about something for a long time and is now simply living inside the proof of it. When they stepped back from each other, she looked at his bandaged arms and then at his face. "The wren," she said. He looked at her. "Nate doesn't know it's from you yet," she said. "I want to be there when he finds out." She looked at him steadily. "If that's all right." "All right," he said, simply, completely, as if that were the easiest agreement he had ever made. Nate Hollister found the wooden wren on his front step on Christmas morning. It was early, the sky still gray-blue before the full sunrise, and he came to the door in his nightclothes and found it sitting on the step with no note. Every feather was worked with care. The cedar still smelled faintly of the mill. He picked it up and turned it in his hands and looked at it the way an 8-year-old looks at proof that someone took him seriously. Then he ran inside to show his mother. Leora was watching from the end of the road with Cyrus, at a distance where they could see the Hollister porch without being seen. She looked at him. He was watching the house with the expression of a man who has done something that cost him nothing and meant everything. "He doesn't know it was you," she said. "No," he said. "Does it matter?" He considered it honestly, the way he considered everything. "No," he said. "The wren is what matters." She took his hand, the bandaged one, carefully. He let her. January came. Leora stopped inventing reasons to visit the mill and started arriving with 2 cups of coffee at 7 in the morning, because that was what Tuesday mornings had become, and then what most mornings had become, and Harrow Bend understood this within the first week and made its peace with it at varying speeds. Preston Aldridge was gracious about the whole of it, which elevated everyone's opinion of him. Berta Scholl found it entirely unexpected and told everyone, which was her way of approving. Nate Hollister told his whole class that the miller had made him a real wooden bird, and that it was the finest thing he had ever owned, and that Mr. Vann was the best man in the county. Nobody in that classroom argued with him. The mill in February was the same as it had always been. Before sunrise, after dark, the grain dust and the turning stone and the work that never fully ended. What was different was the second cup of coffee on the millstone ledge at 7 in the morning, and Leora on her chair with her lesson books, and the particular quiet that settles between two people who have stopped trying to prove anything to each other and arrived somewhere more permanent. On a morning in February, Cyrus was working a piece of cedar into something small that he covered quickly when she came through the door. She saw it. She said nothing. Some things are worth the wait. She sat in her chair. He worked at his bench. The millstone turned. Outside, Harrow Bend went about its business. The cattle buyers long gone, the farmers at the grain store, the ordinary life of a Kansas town in the winter of 1882. And inside, a 47-year-old miller who had been running that wheel since he was 32, and a 24-year-old schoolteacher who had come looking for something worth staying for, sat together in the warm, cold air of the mill, and it was without question exactly right. Cyrus Vann walked into a burning building because he knew which door to use. He did not think of it as courage. He thought of it as going to where the actual problem was, the grain chute, the fuel, the thing everyone else was working around, and dealing with it. He had been doing that his whole life. Adelaide Whittaker's grain bill that wasn't a grain bill. A wooden wren for a boy who asked a serious question. 15 years of grinding the wheat that fed the town while other men sat at the corner table and got the long stories told about them. I think about Leora sometimes, about what it takes, at 24, in a town full of confident men with easy money and easier laughter, to look at a 47-year-old miller with gray at his temples and grain dust in the lines of his face and think, that one, not in spite of what he is, because of it. To say I'd rather it be the miller and mean it precisely, and then wait 4 months for the miller to believe he is the man she means. That kind of patience is its own form of wisdom. The most valuable people in any room are rarely the ones at the corner table. They are the ones who know which door to use. Look for the person who knows which door to use. Thank you for spending this time with me and with Cyrus and Leora today. Wherever you are right now, whether you're in Kansas or Carolina, in the Philippines, or in South Africa, in Canada, or somewhere I couldn't find on a map, I am grateful you're here with prairie hearts. May God bless you and the people you love. Until next time, keep writing.